I'm going to start with the thing that we originally started with, and that was the timeline of from Adam to the flood. And I'm not going to go through all this stuff. This is just all a reminder of stuff. But as I was looking at it this morning, it just struck me even more. I had put these red lines on to show the overlap between Adam and how close it came to Noah being able to have talked to Adam. And if you look at these, everyone except for Adam and Seth, where's the red thing? Adam and Seth, their times go, they both died, but this is the line of this is when Noah was born, and Adam and Seth died before Noah was born, and then Enoch also died before Noah was born. He actually didn't die, he was translated. So every one of these other ones, Enos, Cainan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Methuselah, and Lamech, all lived during the time Adam was alive, which just is incredible to me. Noah could have talked to any one of those guys, and perhaps any one of a number of other people that aren't even named, talked to them who had talked directly to Adam. That just blows my mind when I think about it, because so many years went by, but because of the long ages at the time, it's just pretty amazing to me. Well, we then started looking at a timeline of the Bible. We have creation, and obviously the first people created were Adam and Eve. And the whole purpose of going through this whole study was to show I guess you can't call it much else, but the failures of men, failures of God's people, and his mercy, but also his justice, or his unwillingness to stand with wrongdoing. But from the very start, from the very beginning, Adam and Eve, they disobeyed the only command they had. Well, I guess it wasn't the only command. They were told to replenish the earth too. But maybe that was even later. But they had a command in the Garden of Eden, and that was, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the one thing that they were told not to do. And Satan deceived Eve, and Eve talked Adam into it, and they both ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so there was disobedience from the very beginning. But what that disobedience with Adam and Eve did was, before they ate of that tree, they did not have the knowledge of good and evil. They only knew one thing: don't eat of this tree. And when they ate of it, their eyes were opened. They all of a sudden could differentiate between good and evil. It became inherent within human beings to have an understanding, inbred understanding of right and wrong, of good and evil. And as the book of Romans says, sin is not imputed where there is no law. So Adam and Eve could have done, they didn't have the law. They didn't have the knowledge of good and evil until they ate of that tree. And so they didn't have consequences if they did something that was really wrong, but they had no knowledge of it. So what they did was they brought the knowledge of sin in the world, and because of that, we're all guilty when we violate that good and evil, or violate the good, I guess, and do evil. So anyway, it was a big step. People call it the fall of man. It really was the eye-opening of man, I guess you would say, and made it possible for people to be convicted of their sin by God. So anyway, because of free will, that's how things worked. And so things didn't start out that well with Adam and Eve. And when we got to Cain and Abel, didn't go much better there either. Cain ended up killing Abel, and he was banished out, and so Cain and Abel. So the first 4 people alive had issues. I guess Abel, to our knowledge, didn't do anything wrong, but 3 out of 4 people, the very first people, messed up. And then things just got worse from there until the time of the flood, when God decided, I can't let this world go on anymore. I gotta do a do-over. And so he decided to wipe the earth out and start again. And as we all know, that was with Noah. And we don't know how many people died in the flood, but if you just add up, do a little bit of math on how many kids they possibly could have had, and their kids had kids, and from the time of Adam to the time of the flood, there could have easily been more, in the number of billions of people alive that all died in the flood. And so unrighteousness is serious business. God's serious about it. He let things go for hundreds of years, but there comes a time when I'm not going to do this anymore, and judgment comes. So that's the first case, I guess you'd say, and it's a major one of God's mercy and long suffering, but also God's judgment when he's had enough. Well, then things went okay for a while, I suppose, but then people, as Noah's family multiplied and multiplied and multiplied, now they're all in one place. But then some of them got the idea that maybe we need to get closer to God, so let's just build this great tower that we can all come to all the time, and that's where we'll worship God and that sort of thing. But what they were doing by making this tower was they were trying to make everybody stay together. The God had said, go out and multiply and replenish the earth. And the idea is go out, spread out over the earth and fill it up. And they weren't doing that. So God mixed up their language, created all the different languages, and all of a sudden people were talking and they couldn't understand each other. And so you'd go from one person to the next and comprende English, people would, finally you get to somebody that said, yeah, I understand what you're saying. So, okay, let's get together. All the people that spoke one language would get together and go off on their own. And so the earth began to be populated in other places besides the area of the Tower of Babel. But that also illustrates that they weren't doing what God told them to do. Go out and fill up the earth. And so again, failure of man to do what God said, using their own wisdom instead. And so the time came when God decided, okay, this is not working, to try to keep this whole world together, trying to shepherd all these sheep. I'm going to just take one man. That's going to be Abraham, and through him, I'm going to bring a nation into the world, and through that nation, all nations would be blessed by the seed of Abraham, which down the road was Jesus. Jesus comes from the line of Abraham, and so that was the beginning of the nation of Israel. The children of Abraham, God's people, so to speak. Really, everybody is God's people. He created everybody and he cares about everybody, but he had a chosen nation, and that was beginning from Abraham. And so Abraham had a child, Isaac, and then Isaac had Jacob, and then Jacob had the 12 patriarchs. And with the 12 patriarchs, by that I mean Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. All of those 12 tribes of Israel then became the nation of Israel. And Jacob was given a new name, and that was what? Israel. And that's where the nation of Israel comes from, is from that name. Jacob's descent, or yeah, Jacob's children, these 12 tribes, all multiplied and became the nation of Israel. And that actually happened where? Well, no, it happened in Egypt. They, for 430 years, they were in Egypt, and the 12 tribes grew and grew and grew and grew until, well, the tribes originated in Israel. That's correct, what you were saying. But the nation actually became a nation of people. Pardon? Well, they ended up going to Canaan, but it was just 70 people that left Israel and went into Egypt. So you wouldn't really call 70 people a nation yet. But by the time they came out of Egypt, it was a huge number of people. And when they filled up Canaan, they were instantly a nation because there were so many people. So anyway, but that brings up Joseph. When Joseph was one of Jacob's sons, he ended up getting sent off sold off as a slave to Egypt, and that's how the children of Israel ended up going down into Egypt, and they spent 430 years there. And in that period of time, they multiplied, became a nation. They weren't in, I call it Egyptian captivity, but they really weren't captives when they first went, because Joseph was second in command to the Pharaoh. He brought his family down, and the Pharaoh says, here, take this land, it'll be yours and your people. But over time, there came a Pharaoh who knew not. Joseph didn't, that was old history to him. So he put the children of Israel in slave labor, and they weren't allowed to leave because they were an asset to the Egyptians by all the things that they could build and everything. So they ended up being in captivity, but their whole stay was 430 years. But then, as we know, the Exodus happened. Moses came into the picture, and he was the one who did the 10 plagues, I guess, in order to get the children out. But it was when we talked about Moses that I brought in this. I'm just going to throw it in. I'm not going to talk about it long, but remember we talked about the woman that that got Moses out of the river and brought him up as her own son. My saying was, I think that was Hatshepsut, who turned out to be, when she got older, became the greatest female leader. She was called a pharaoh, but at very least she was a queen, the greatest queen of all Egyptian history. And I did this. I'm not going to read it all, but she was the daughter of Tutmosis, and just having the name of Moses in her father's name, Tutmosis, that says to me, that says a whole lot. Why wouldn't she name her child after her father? I mean, it should be no surprise whatsoever. So anyway, that's just one of the reasons why I think that Hatshepsut was this one. And it's just amazing. They didn't even know about her history until early 2000s. I think maybe the early, I guess it was the early 2000s. Her name had showed up and everything, but her son after her tried to wipe out all of her name everywhere. Wasn't totally successful, but because of it, there wasn't that much information until they started digging in the Valley of the Kings, and they started uncovering all this stuff, and all of a sudden they find out Hatshepsut was this magnificent queen that built all kinds of things like this. And anyway, you can see the people, how tiny they are, and she built all kinds of other stuff and did military actions actions and everything. She was really one of the best pharaohs that they had. But anyway, I just wanted to remind you of that because that's a really interesting story. But then we talk about the 70 years or the 40 years that they were in the wilderness wandering. And what did they do when they immediately when they got out of Egyptian captivity? What did they do? Want to go back? We don't like it here. So they were just complaining about everything, and so God didn't punish them for that, but God had Moses send 12 spies up into the land of Canaan to spy out the land, and we all know what happened there. Out of the 12, only 2 of them said, we can do this. Only 2 of them had faith. With God on our side, we can do anything. But 10 of them said, no, there's giants there. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes. And so they said, we can't do this. And so God said, well, if that's the case, then I'll just let you wander around for 40 more years until you maybe think a little bit better about it. It's like a mom, your kids are complaining about something, and so you give them something else to do that's just as bad for a time, and you go think about it. Well, anyway, they do finally go in, but even Moses, the great prophet Moses, he wasn't allowed to go in, was he? And it was because he had struck the stone and said, do we have to do this? Taking credit for himself, and he wasn't allowed to go in. But then it was Joshua that brought them into the promised land. That's a curious thing because Joshua's name is Yeshua, and I mean that's the way they would pronounce it, and that's the name that is Greekized. The name Jesus is the Greek version of Yeshua. So that's just one of those type and an anti-type. Joshua was a type of Christ. You see him bringing the children of Israel into the promised land. Then down the road, you see Jesus opening the doors to the real promised land to the people. So anyway, they got in, and God told them, go in and wipe out the land. Don't want to leave anybody there. Seems cruel, but we can't have that influence. But did they do it? No, they didn't. They left people, and those same people were a thorn in their side for their entire existence. The whole period of Judges is partly because of that. So anyway, as we saw the history developing, failure to do what God was asking them to do or telling them to do. And that was the case with the conquest of Canaan as well. But once they got in and occupied the land, then the period of the Judges comes along. And in that period of time, there were 15 judges that were appointed to lead the land, and the children of Israel would go off chasing after some idol, and then bad things would start happening to them. Here's a list of things. When Othniel was the judge, people from Mesopotamia up, that's the area of Babylon, Assyria, that sort of thing. But before Babylon and Assyria came into existence, came down, invaded the country, and the people, oh no, they were lifting up their voices to God. Oh, we're sorry, we'll follow you and all that, and just get us out of this mess. And so God sent Othniel, and they fought back the Mesopotamians, and everything was fine for a while. Then they started chasing after idols again, and just 15 times over and over again, messing up. Then God, then going back praying to God, and then God sending a judge, showing a ton of patience with these people. 15 times he did that, using other nations to punish the nation of Israel. No, not from the time they left Egypt. From the time they went down into Egypt, it was 430 years. And then when they got out, they spent 40 more years before they entered in. So it was really 470 years from the time they went into Egypt till the time they went back and occupied Canaan. Yes. Well, from the time they left Egypt, they had just gotten started when God sent the spies, or when Moses sent the spies up, and God said, "All right, it's going to be 40 more years." So they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and during that time, everyone from the fighting age and up didn't finish out those 40 years. It was only the people that were, in that course of that time that were replacing the elders, through natural means by birth. And so the numbers given like 102,000 something men of fighting age never made it. They died before they entered into the land of Canaan. So I don't know, does that answer the question? Yeah, that was 40 years. From the time they came out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea, from the time that happened till the time they entered into the land of Canaan, it was 40 years. So, okay, so next after the judges, they had, up, down, up, down, up, down, all through the period of the judges. And finally they say, this is not working. We need a king. Instead of trusting God as their king and just doing what God said, everything would have been fine. Instead of doing that, they decide, well, the answer really is to have a king to make us behave, I guess is the idea behind. We want to be like everybody else. Have a king, because they all have one, so we got to have one too. And that made God very disappointed, and he was angry about it. But he said, all right, you asked for a king. Guess what? I'm going to give you one. You're going to be sorry. And so he gave them the king, and that was, first one was Saul. And Saul, how great was he? They start off good, but then things went to pot, and everybody was sorry they ever asked for a king before he was done with his reign. And he reigned for about 40 years, and during that time things really went to pot. And so it was time for another king, and God raised up David to be the next king. And we know all the story about David as a young shepherd, and all the time that he went being chased by Saul in the wilderness, and all that kind of stuff. And so David became a king, and he was essentially a good king. But was he an entirely good person? Well, he made some bad mistakes, really bad mistakes. And yet he's said in the Bible to be a man after God's own heart. He did repent. He confessed those things, maybe only after being outed by, was it Jethro? Nathan the prophet. But he acknowledged it, and anyway, he was punished for it. His child died, and so anyway, David was a pretty good king, but even him, he wanted to conquer stuff, and so was a really warring king. And because of that, he wasn't allowed to build the temple of God. God said, "You've got too much blood on your hands, and so I'm going to leave that to the next guy, who is your son Solomon." So Solomon started off really good too. God through the prophet said, I think it was Eli, said to him, God wants to know what would you like? God is offering to give you whatever you want. And Solomon said, I just want wisdom so I can govern my people, which was a really awesome, noble thing to do. And he started off really good. And because of that, God says, I'll give you wisdom, but not only that, I'm going to give you riches as well. And then things were going fine until Solomon, people were either he was asking or people were just bringing women from all over the world to be his concubines. And that was his undoing. He ended up listening to them and things started going south for Solomon as well. And so he didn't do a good job of raising up his child Rehoboam, or Jeroboam, I should say. I got that backwards. Jeroboam should be up on Israel and Rehoboam down on Judah. I don't know why I didn't notice that the first time. Anyway, so Rehoboam was Solomon's son, and he became the king after. But Solomon had taxed the people quite a bit, and as we remember from looking at it, the people rebelled when Rehoboam said, "You know, my dad. You thought my dad taxed you? What did you see what I can do?" And so he listened to his young advisors rather than the old wise people, and decided to just tax the people even more. Well, they said, we're not having that. And so Jeroboam led a rebellion, and 10 of the tribes split off. Like I say, that Rehoboam and Jeroboam should be switched. Jeroboam really started the nation of Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, and Rehoboam still had the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. And so it went like that for a while. I threw in a map here. The dotted line there, if you can see it, goes like that. Everything above the dotted line was Israel under Jeroboam. Everything below was Judah under Rehoboam. Well, just briefly, we went through all these, and I'm certainly not going to take the time to do all that, but we just talked about Saul, David, and Solomon. But now this is the divided kingdom, and it's Jeroboam was the first house of Israel, of the children of the 10 tribes of Israel. There was Jeroboam. He was bad. Nadab, bad. Baasha, I don't know why this, bad. Elah, bad. Zimri, really bad. Omri, extra bad. Yeah, you getting the idea. I mean, we talked about these, and I don't want to tell the story of each one because it'd take too much time. Ahab, you all remember Ahab and Jezebel, the worst couple probably ever. That was during the time when Elijah had that altercation with the priests of Baal, and real interesting story, but don't have time to tell it now. But then there was Ahaziah, who was also bad. During that time, Elijah was translated. The chariots came down, got him, and took him off. And Elisha, the prophet, takes over. And then there's Joram. He was bad. Jehu, he was mostly bad. Jehoahaz, bad. Jehoash, bad. Jeroboam, bad. Zechariah, bad. Shallum, bad. Menahem, bad. Pekahiah, bad. Pekah, bad. Hoshea, bad. And then there's the Assyrian captivity. God says, I'm done with the 10 tribes of Israel. You guys, you haven't even had a single good king. We're done. You're going off into Assyrian captivity. And so that's what happened. The 10 tribes of Israel, and I still didn't change the Rehoboam, Jeroboam thing. 10 tribes of Israel went off into Assyrian captivity in 722 BC. And so that left Judah to go on their own. Well, looking at the kings of the house of David, the kings of Judah, it starts off with Rehoboam, who was mostly bad. Abijah, his son, mostly bad. Asa was a good king. First time in all of all Israel and all Judah so far, only one good king so far. Jehoshaphat was good. So we got two good kings. Jehoram, bad. Ahaziah, bad. Athaliah was also really bad. She was a queen that took over after Ahaziah died quite young. And then there was Jehoash after that. He was started off good, but then turned bad before it was over with. Amaziah started off good, then turned bad. Uzziah, he was mostly good. Jotham was good. Ahaz, absolutely wicked king. Then there was Hezekiah. He was really good, one of the best kings, and because he was as good as a good king and straightened the nation out. When Sennacherib from Assyria came down to try to destroy Israel, or tried to destroy Jerusalem and Judah, God sent that angel of death, for lack of a better term, and 186,000 or 185,000 soldiers died outside the city. That, remember that story? That was under Hezekiah. Then his son after him, Manasseh, was as good as Hezekiah was. His son Manasseh was bad. He was extra bad. Then Ammon, he was the worst of all. After him, Josiah was one of the best. Between Hezekiah and Josiah, they were tied for first place, I guess, amongst the best of the kings of Israel. But Josiah, remember, he started to be king at 8 years old, and during his early years, somebody went into the temple, and off in a corner, covered by dust, was a book, a scroll. They brought it to him, and in that book was the law of Moses, the book of the law. They had lost it for years and years and years, didn't even know it existed. And when they started reading it, Josiah goes, "Oh no, we really have messed stuff up." And so he did a great reformation and tried to straighten the people out. And so he did really good. But he also ended up, instead of trusting God completely, he threw his lot in with Pharaoh Necho, the Egyptians, against Assyria, and that didn't turn out so good. And then after him came Jehoahaz, who was bad king. Jehoiakim was bad. Jehoiachin was bad. This is Judah, by the way. They're all bad. And Zedekiah, he was the last of the kings of Judah. He was bad as well. And as a result, Judah goes off into Babylonian captivity. And so we have Israel going into Assyrian captivity in 722 BC, Judah going into Babylonian captivity. There were three different waves of people that went off into captivity. The first one was in 606 BC, and then the next one in 597 BC, and then the last wave of people that went was in 586 BC, and then that captivity ended in 536. So we've got the Babylonian captivity going, and that was for 70 years that took place. Jeremiah had prophesied. He told them exactly how long it would be, 70 years that they would be in captivity. And that's exactly how long it was, from 606 to 536, 70 years in that captivity. And when they went off into Babylonian captivity, when we talked about that, I read Psalm 137. And I think it's good now, after we've looked at all this, plus the major prophets and the minor prophets, which we just got done with looking at all the prophets. So it'd be good to read this one more time. This is the children of Israel when they first arrived in the Babylonian captivity. Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yes, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it. For there arose those who carried us away captive asked for us a song, and those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Wrong one. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy, remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation. That's the Edomites, who should have been their brothers. They were right in there cheering the Assyrians on. Lay it waste. O daughter of Babylon, who are to be destroyed? Happy the one who repays you as you have served us. Happy the one who takes and dashes your little ones against the rock. Anyway, I just, that first part, it's so poetic. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yes, we wept when we remembered Zion. I don't know, it just gets me. I don't know why I have an extra slide in there, but anyway, the timeline then continues with the return from captivity. These are recent things that we studied under Nehemiah and a priest named Joshua. They orchestrated the rebuilding of the temple and starting the rebuilding of Jerusalem itself. That stuff is pretty recent history for our class, so I'm not going to go over it too much. But the people were building their own houses, maybe with marble walls and stuff like that, but they hadn't finished the temple, so they're encouraged to do that. Some of the minor prophets, they were rebuilding the temple, finally got that done. And then after Zechariah, who was also telling them to finish, keep working, and he also had things thrown out into the future as well. But then after Malachi, silence, and that's where we've gotten to in our class, and Brandon has started to deal with the period of silence of the Bible. But there's history that we can learn from that. And let's see, after this period of time of silence, that there's Jesus came into the world, and that's where we're gonna, after Brandon's done, that's where we're gonna take off when I start teaching again. But real quickly, since we have a couple minutes, just want to look really quickly at where the prophets fit in. It's probably too hard for you to read, but anyway, there's Elijah and Elisha, some of the first of the prophets. They were in this period of the when the kingdom first divided, and Elijah and Elisha. Then there's Amos and Jonah down here, and history-wise. Then there's Obadiah, Joel, Isaiah. This is about 800 or 790, 800, that kind of period when Isaiah was, and Micah fits in the early 700s. Then there was Hosea, and then Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and then that it continues there with Ezekiel, Daniel, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So anyway, it's all during the period. Some of it was during the time of the divided kingdom, and then quite a few of them were all of where is Zedekiah? Well, anyway, I don't know what. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong list, I guess. Yeah, Zedekiah. There you go. He was the last of the kings of Israel. Okay, I was looking at this whole thing wrong. But anyway, that's kind of an idea of where they all fit in. So this has been kind of a brief overview. I hope it helped a little bit. One thing I wanted to say, in case I forget, next week when Brandon's teaching, at some point in the next few weeks, he'll be talking about one of the Seleucid leaders. And down in Israel as well. And he'll give that history. But I just want to point out that in the first part of Antiochus is Antioch. And there's there's Antioch of Syria and Antioch of Pisidia. And just like there's cities called Alexandria, named after Alexander the Great, well, these cities are named Antioch after Antiochus Epiphanes. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that in there as a point of interest. I'll try to remember to bring that one when he starts talking about Antiochus. But any questions? All right. Well, we'll get together back again in time for worship service in 15 minutes. Many of you met our friends Rob and Juanita Kingston that were here last Sunday. And during the week, most of you know we've been having trouble with this computer, and so I've been using my own computer, which is perfectly fine, but it makes it a problem when I'm gone if I take my computer with me. It was taking 4 minutes for this thing just to get up to where you could sign in. And then if you wanted to open a program, you're talking about another 3 minutes, and trying to get ready to do a live stream and everything was just a real nightmare. Well, Rob, who's a techie kind of a guy, while he was here, he took this computer, did all the analyzing on it and everything. He ended up taking one of his own SSD hard drive, a solid state hard drive, 1 terabyte hard drive, put it in this machine and just gave it to us. And those aren't cheap, by the way, but it went from taking 4 minutes to boot up. It now takes 20 seconds. And so we can use it again. And I just wanted to have you know that it's not because of me, it's because my friend Rob that did this for us, and very selfless person, and I do appreciate it. I'm sure you all will too, but I don't know whether it has anything to do with that message that's up there about setting up some audio or whatever, but also while they were here, Keith and him and I came up and we got the piece of equipment, the new piece of equipment running to make it so that no matter what microphone we use, it all goes over the internet to the live stream. So anybody that has to listen to it from home should be a better experience. And as you notice, this big black ball that's been up here all this time, that was the microphone that I used to live stream. It's all gone now. So hopefully everything is a little prettier and also working much better. So anyway, thanks be to God for letting us get all this stuff put together. So that set aside, we're going to have scripture reading first. Scripture reading today is from 3 passages of scripture: Matthew, John, and Deuteronomy. First one is Matthew chapter 14. So they all ate and were filled. And now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And then from John 6, then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." And then from Deuteronomy 16 or 18, this is where the prophecy comes from. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, and from your brethren, him you shall hear. Well, we'll see more about this as this lesson progresses. Jesus, after having sent his 12 disciples out, saying, "I'm sending you forth." That's what the word apostle means. He's making them his apostles now. He sent them out, what we call the limited commission. And that limited commission was that 2 by 2, the apostles went out and preached around in the area of Galilee. And he had told them in a wonderful speech all the things that they were going to be experiencing all throughout their ministry as apostles. And after that, they went out and did preach the gospel wherever they went. And now they're returning, and it's time for a rest for them. Or is it? Well, it starts off like they're going to get a rest, but it doesn't look like that happened. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 30, by the way, most of what we look at today is out of the Gospel of Mark. This is another one of those events in his life that Mark tells us more about than Matthew or Luke or John, although we are going to read some from other of these writers who add more detail. But in Mark 6, verse 30, it says, "Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, 'Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while.' And so they had rehearsed to him. Wouldn't you love to have been a fly on the wall when they were telling him all their adventures, all the things that they had done, going about and teaching, and the experiences that they had had? Remember, he had warned them that they go into a house, the people might not necessarily receive them, and just the different things that they were supposed to do. I would love to have heard some of the experiences that they had, but we're not told that, and so we just have to leave it there. But Jesus says, showing his own compassion for his own disciples and himself, actually, he said, let's go aside off by ourselves to a deserted area, and we're going to rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So all these people that were coming and going and asking them questions, asking them to do stuff, heal people, all this kind of stuff, Mark says they didn't even have time to eat. They were just mobbed all the time. So Jesus says, let's get out of here. Let's go to a place for some rest. Verse 32 says, "So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves." So they're in the area of Capernaum, having come back from their adventures out there preaching and teaching the word. Now they get in the boat and go somewhere in a deserted area where there isn't a town. And they hopefully, the idea was to go get some rest, but here's what happened. "But the multitude saw them departing." They saw him leave, and many knew him and ran there on foot from all the cities. Some of them knew him well enough to know where he might go to get off by himself, which Jesus did often. Anyway, they knew him and they ran there on foot from all the cities, and they arrived before them. They even got there before the guys could row the boat over to where they were going. They arrived before them and came together to him. So Jesus is getting off the boat, and sure enough, here's a crowd already waiting for him. Well, rather than getting mad and just sending them all off, Jesus, verse 34, "When he came out, he saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd." That sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? Back just a couple lessons ago, when Jesus was going to start this limited commission, that's what he did. In fact, I put this up here. If you remember the slide that I showed, it was Matthew 9:36. "But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion for them, because they were weary and scattered as sheep, having no shepherd." And so this is a story that repeated itself. Every time Jesus saw these crowds, he was moved with compassion for them. They're scattered around, they're wandering around, trying to find the answers to life, I guess, in a way, trying to understand, when is this Messiah coming, and what is this all about? And they were being fed wrong information from their leadership. The scribes and the Pharisees, the Sadducees were all teaching them wrong stuff. They had misinterpreted, misapplied, and everything, the scriptures, to fit their own ideas of what was going to happen. They were telling them that the Messiah was going to come and be an earthly king And he was going to save the people from Rome and kick the Romans out and become a great king and king over the world. And that's what they were expecting the Messiah to happen. But these people weren't seeing anything like that happening. But here comes a guy that they're seeing that is healing people, preaching like no one ever preached before, doing things that only God can do, a person that was God was with could do. And so they're wondering, what in the world is going on? And so they're coming out to hear him, maybe to get an answer. Well, what happens next? All four of the Gospels record this event, which is kind of unusual. But all four Gospels talk about this next event. I'm going to be reading the account from Mark, but it says in Mark chapter 6, verse 34, so he began to teach them many things. Now, Mark doesn't give us any more detail about it, but actually in Luke chapter 9, verse 11, Luke adds this. Besides teaching them many things, it says, and he spoke to them about the kingdom of God, and he healed those who needed healing. So he didn't just teach them, but he also healed, but he was speaking to them about the kingdom of God. Big surprise, right? Jesus came, John the Baptist came, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And then Jesus came along, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And now he's continuing the message, preaching to them about the kingdom of God. It's not a long way off. It's here now, folks. The kingdom of God is at hand, and he was teaching them, and he was healing them. He was compassionate, all right, but that's not why he was healing them. The reason he was healing them, we're going to look a little bit later, but he was doing miracles that they could see, and it was going to be illustrating things that they couldn't see, how he could heal them spiritually. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. In verse 35, it says, now the day was now far spent, and his disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away, that is, send the people away, that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. And so the disciples are trying to be compassionate as well. You know, we've got to stop teaching them right now and send them off so they can get some food before it gets dark or before the stores close or whatever you want to call them. And so they're saying, send the people away. But in verse 37, he answered and said to them, you give them something to eat. You can imagine you being out. You may be carrying a couple biscuits with you for the day or something like that, but then to be told, you give them something to eat. Well, you can imagine how you would react. Well, they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? Now, where this 200 denarii comes in, we can only surmise because we're not told, but I'm guessing that it was because that was what they had in their treasury. Remember, Judas was the treasurer of the group, and he kept the money in a purse. Well, what is 200 denarii? Seems like that's more than they would carry, because this is what 200 denarii looks like, and what it was 2/3 of a year's wages for a typical laborer. That's 8 months worth of pay, 8 months pay, and they're saying, should we take this 8 months pay worth of money that we have and go buy something to eat? Well, there's an interesting detail that John adds, and that is, he says, now the Passover feast of the Jews was near, and Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, now we're getting some people's names in here. He said to Philip, where should we buy bread that these may eat? But Jesus said to Philip, where we're gonna find bread that these people may eat? And he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Jesus knew what he was going to do before he ever asked Philip this question, but he's testing him. Jesus says, hey, Philip, where are we going to buy bread? Seeing if Philip had the faith to say, we don't need to buy it, you can make it. You can give it to him. But that's not what Philip said. Philip answered and said to him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that everyone may have a little. So they must have had 200 denarii worth of money somehow. But Philip says, that's not even enough to buy for all these people. Well, John continues, and it says, one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there's a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? I mean, Jesus, that's all we've got. We've got this money that won't buy enough, but we got these 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but that's certainly not enough. What are we supposed to do? Well, then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. That used to be a big discussion people have. Well, if they went out to a desert, there's no green grass out in a desert. But it's the newer translations say deserted place, which is that's more accurate. That's what it is. So they had a nice, comfortable place to sit down, sat them down in the green grass. So they sat down in ranks by hundreds and fifties, these big groups. You can just imagine a huge hillside full of people sitting in these groups. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, and he blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. So far, we don't know how many people it was yet in Mark's narrative, but a whole big group that Jesus had compassion on, and they all ate and they were filled. Well, then it says they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. So they started off with, wouldn't even fill 1 basket, let alone 12. They came back with more than they started with. And it's interesting to me that there were 12 baskets full. Was that 1 for each of the apostles? They had taken the baskets out and just were passing it all out. And when they came back, they had more than they even started with. That's speculation on my part, but it's kind of interesting that there were 12 baskets. Anyway, now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. That's what Mark says, just 5,000 men. They had all eaten and were full. But Matthew adds 5,000 men besides women and children. Now, if you've ever been to any gathering, especially a religious gathering, what's the percentage of women to men? Almost always there's more women than there are men. And so even if it was just an even amount, and then you throw in children, if there are 5,000 men, we're talking about 10,000 eyewitnesses, 10,000 ear witnesses. They both saw it, heard the teaching, heard what was going on, and 10,000 tummy witnesses, for lack of a better term. I made that one up, but they all had full bellies after this event happened. And so 10,000 is probably a what's the word I'm looking for? Is not enough. It probably should be more. It's a conservative, too conservative of a guess, but we'll say 10,000. Just think about it. 10,000 witnesses recorded by 4 historians, 2 of which were also eyewitnesses. Matthew and John were right there. They were some of the ones passing out the bread and fish people. If you go back through history, look at the histories and find out how many people testify about this happening or that happening. A lot of times it's only one historian describes something that happened, and we take that and we believe it. Here we got 4 historians, and 2 of them themselves were eyewitnesses, and there were 10,000 actual witnesses that could tell the other 2, like Mark and Luke, what had happened. And with that kind of verification, here's the question: how can anyone doubt? I mean, this is just one event in Jesus's life, but it's powerful message that we can use to go out and tell our friends, tell our neighbors, tell the people we don't even know, anybody that will listen. This is established by 10,000 witnesses and recorded by 4 historians. And this is powerful evidence that we can use to teach people about Jesus and his power. Just in case you were not sure what 10,000 people looks like, here's a stadium in Europe somewhere that holds 10,500 people. So when you talk about feeding this many people and all these people witnessing, that looks like a basketball game down there. If somebody made a 3-pointer from behind the halfway line, center court, believe me, 10,000 people would be telling about it for the next while. Well, that would be nothing compared to what Jesus did. So you can just imagine the effect that this is going to happen when these people spread out and start talking. Well, Jesus provided for the physical needs of people. In this case, he was giving them bread and fish to eat, something to fill their bellies so that they wouldn't be hungry. They had come out so far, coming out just to hear Jesus, because they were like sheep that were looking for food to eat, and he fed them, but he didn't feed them. Well, he fed them physically, but before he fed them physically, he was preaching to them, feeding them spiritually. The whole in all of Jesus's ministry, what he did was he provided physical needs for people while he was on the earth, not just because it was a fun thing to do, but it was a way to show people the power that he had. It was a graphic illustration of his ability to provide for spiritual needs. So when people talk about Jesus saves, when you talk about that, that's kind of conceptual in a way. You can't see salvation happen. It's a change of heart and God justifying a person, but it's all spiritual. But if you can see the power of God in Jesus performing miracles, healing people, teaching the way he taught, then, well, if he's got that kind of power over physical things, what do you think he can do with spiritual? That's the whole reason why he did all that he did. And it's a testimony about him that he chose healing and feeding people to show his power. And in another lesson, I talked about what he could have done. He could have picked up the whole Sea of Galilee and dumped it somewhere else, or something like that. He could have done some powerful things which would have convinced us of his power, but wouldn't have accomplished anything particularly good. So he used these miracles in a good way, but it was to show his power over spiritual things. Well, the response then was, then those men, that is people, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, they said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. So they're looking at what Jesus did, and this has got to be the one that Moses was talking about, the one that all the prophets, Isaiah and Micah and all the prophets had talked about, this one to come. And they were saying, this has got to be him. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, which we read already, is where they got that from. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him you shall hear. That was Moses saying. Moses was a prophet, but he also was a lawgiver. And so a prophet like him would be a lawgiver as well, which is exactly what Jesus was. That's who it was referring to. Everybody understood that this prophet that Moses referred to was referring to the Messiah. And so what these people were saying, this has got to be the Messiah. This has got to be the one that's going to establish his kingdom on this earth and all sorts of things. Well, Moses had said, this prophet is going to be from your brethren. Jesus was going to be one of their own. It's going to be one of their own their own people that was going to come. And so that made him a hometown boy. And we all know what it means to have a hometown hero. Those of you that are familiar with Kashmir, there's a young lady that plays for, which team is it? Plays basketball for Louisville. And when they were doing so well in the playoffs and everything, everybody was, that's this girl from our town, that kind of thing. That's who this guy was going to be that came. And so it's not surprising that they are about to try to make him a king. The next thing that we see next week is they're going to try to make him a king. And so he has to take evasive measures. We'll deal with that next week. But for now, just some takeaways. Jesus cares deeply about people. Every time he saw this crowd of people wandering around, he had compassion on them because they looked like sheep looking for a shepherd. And he cared about them. And we learn from this event also that Jesus can provide. He made food enough for 10,000 people, not only just to have a bite or two, but to be full, to get their bellies full and have 12 baskets left over. He provided the physical needs for these people, which shows that he can provide our spiritual needs as well. And not only can he provide, but Jesus will provide if we let him. We have to give him the chance to feed us spiritually. And we learned that there were 10,000 witnesses to Jesus's miracles. This wasn't something done in a corner. 10,000 people witnessed this happening. That's evidence for us. This is a story to share with people that we come to without seeming to be judgmental or cramming some doctrine down their throats or whatever like people object to so much. This is just a way to show them God's love and that Jesus can and will provide for us. And so I just encourage everyone to use this account of Jesus and the feeding of the 5,000 in a way that we can get to people and spark their interest in learning more about Jesus and learning more about God. So that's the end of the lesson. We're going to be singing invitation song in just a moment. If you are subject to the gospel call in any way and you need our prayers, need assistance, need to be baptized, just let it be known while we stand and sing, I Am Resolved.